Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We're looking now at the second of two lessons dealing with the idea of active server pages, ASP pages, as an API option within Sage CRM. This is the 10th lesson in the cycle of 18 that make up this developer series of lessons. You're very welcome. We're going to be spending about an hour looking at all of the topics. As I said, it is the 10th within the cycle of 18 that we had set out. And in this lesson, we're going to really go into much more detail in how ASP pages are written, how we do tasks to create complexity, and how we can start to handle additional tasks such as the control of buttons in the screen. That's for the idea of screen flow and hyperlinking, where we make those changes, and how we handle the idea of screen flow as well, and mode as well. Now, screen flow is actually something which I want to really start with, and I want to start with how screens exist inside the overall Sage CRM interface, and remind you of some of the things that we discussed in the last lesson. So in the last lesson and in earlier lessons, we discussed how Sage CRM is a metadata-driven application. It uses the idea of stored values in a whole set of tables that describe the fields that will be added to the screen, and provides the properties so that we will know how a screen will behave once it's rendered in as HTML within the screen. And within the context of this, ASP pages use that metadata so that the metadata does the bulk of the heavy lifting. So we don't need to add in individual fields generally into the screen. We just say we want to add a screen. The screen metadata definition will provide those fields, and those fields will have the necessary metadata definitions to allow us to automatically know that we're dealing with a date field, we're dealing with a advanced search select, or whatever type of field it is a product of that. Now, we also looked at how we would go ahead and start to write these ASP pages if we're using something like Visual Studio. I introduced you to the idea that we would have an ASP page which was simply a wrapper page, and that is the thing that is called from the interface, that is plain HTML, that carries out an include for the script file that will need to be executed. So I've got an ASP page here with two include files. One, of course, is the crm.js file, which sets the language that we're using. In our case, it's JavaScript, and it also then goes ahead and sets and calls up the nolang file, which has all of those definitions to make sure that the object, the CRM object that we're using for our API, has been instantiated. Our business code will be in a JavaScript file that is also included, and it's that one then that we're looking at now. We saw as well in the last lesson how we're dealing with different typical tasks. The idea of the list page, the insertion, the edit page, and then also how deletes are handled. This is really all part of the idea of how the interface needs to allow a user to move through the everyday tasks carrying out their functions. We call this the screen flow. And it might be that you're calling the find menu from the main menu. It might be that you're carrying out an insert from the main menu, or you want to be able to start off simply by looking at the list of an item within a list of items within the context of either my CRM or in the context of an existing entity. So we're going to develop this now and look at how a list page is structured. We've seen this in the last lesson, and we saw that a list page does look like this, with the idea that we're using the API objects of the concept of get block to retrieve the metadata, retrieve the object from metadata that will then be used by the get the block object to construct a list. We can see the idea of get context, which is looking at the string information within the URL to be able to work out where we are. If you remember from the last lesson, things like get context knows context in an ASP page, because when the CRM object is instantiated, it will have received all of the CGI variables, whether it is the HTTP server variables, whether it is the HTTP referrer, whether you're getting anything within the URL, etc. That object gets all of the environmental information, so it knows it can deconstruct that to get the context information that you're interested in. We can build the argument string that will then limit the data that is returned and then be able to construct the page and write that out. Again, Sage CRM knows what a page should look like, and that's why we're able to use that method. So in terms of our standard list page, in reality, that's going to look like this. It is just going to be a very simple two-line ASP page, one carrying out the insert where we're inserting sagecrm.js, so it does all of that instantiation of the COM object, and then secondly the reference to the business code that we're using. In this case, that is oppo list, and if we look at oppo list code, we can see that's doing exactly what I described. This is where, you know, we start to think about how we are supposed to be including this into the interface to see the result. That oppo list ASP page is called, in my case, as I'm doing here, from the context of the company tab group. So this is the company menu. So I've come into administration, customization, company. I've found the tab group for the company, and I have added in a new option called oppo list. You'll notice that it is oppo file that is being referenced, and we can see as well that as we change that to custom file, we're calling oppo list.asp as the custom file that we're referencing. Our custom file then looks like this within the interface. Because that opportunity list is defined in metadata, I've not had to worry about constructing that. I've gone in and done a simple administrative task to be able to create a list that I then want to use inside an ASP page. Here I'm reusing the opportunity list in that original code. That original code now, that original metadata definition tells me all of the columns that are needed, all of the properties of the column, whether a header is displayed, whether it is searchable, whether it's orderable, whether it is in fact hyperlinked as well. So you can see all of the hyperlinks associated with the individual column values. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on, the idea of how we can change the hyperlinks within the ASP pages and within metadata. But this page needs to be thought of in the context of the user's requirement to flow through the system. After all, we may want to be able to, from a list page, be able to add a new item. We may want to be able to reference help from within the page. So all these things, these additions to the page, we may want to consider. Now, how we add buttons to the screen, well, everything that you need to do inside the ASP environment is defined and is available inside the documentation. Here you can see I've opened the developer guide and I've gone down into the reference area and I'm looking at the button definition. You can see that there's a button method called button, which allows you to define the raw HTML structure for a button, which in our case could take these 6 different parameters. Now, 3 are generally needed in order to get a button onto the screen, and 1 is nearly always left blank because now that's where the image is used, and we're not using images in the context of the button in this current interface design. Here is my script that I've altered to allow me to include a button into the interface. You'll see that I've added 2 lines, lines 6 and 7. You'll notice that I'm using declaring a variable string call ASP button, and I'm using the button method with 3 parameters to define that button. The button is called new. It will be that is a caption code that I'm entering in here, and so that caption code would belong to a caption family. So immediately I'm in the realm of something that could be translated, because it is a visual interface element. It could be, and it's text within the interface, it can be translated. In this case, new has an associated translation, and so whether I was a German user, a French user, or a Spanish user, that interface element would be translated onto the screen, as would all of the other metadata elements that I've used within the page. The second parameter would be where a graphic is referenced for the button, but we're not using any images, so it's not necessary. So I've left that with a null string, an empty string, and I've then put in reference to my new button, new page that I want to call. That new page is called oppo new. We'll see that in a moment, and the structure of a new page in a little bit. But you'll notice that I'm calling it with crm.url. So the job of that particular method is to provide the object that you're invoking with all of the contextual information that is needed. All of the current contextual information will go into that URL so that it will maintain the ability for the ASP page to be able to understand who is logged on, make sure that the correct SID is there, and inherit all of the other common gateway information that we've referenced already, like the get context of the company, etc. So the URL is constructed correctly, and that's the server, whether HTTP, etc., or HTTPS, etc. With then, since it generates a string, we need to add that as a button string into the page, and you can see we do that with myblock.addButton as the method, and then we run the page, or the rest of the page is just written as we would want it. When that appears within the page, add button, all of these methods are tied in to the metadata structure and the the default internal structure of the page. So when we choose to add the button, it knows where buttons need to be added in order to present the correct appearance, so it matches the user interface. So the button goes into the standard location. That button we'll call in a moment to be able to see what it's doing, but we can start to do other jobs. For example, extend this further to add a second button, in this case a help button. My help button is going to call off to the particular help page within the URL, and I'm using here, as you can see here, a call down to the it will be calling out to the opportunity definitions inside the user guide. So I've got a hyperlink that for my help file reference there. I'm building a button. This time I have actually said yes, help.gif is my image. It's not necessary. As I said, it could have been an empty string, but the JavaScript window.open, you can see I'm using a pseudo URL here as to allow me to open up a pop-up window that will contain the help information. And you can see that I'm changing that slightly to make it an on-click event rather than a submission or a standard hyperlink. So you can see that I've changed the button somewhat. That gives you a sense of the sophistication that you can get to, and everything like this is discussed within the documentation and inside the blogs on the Sage Community Hub. If we see how that looks, you can see that it was added secondarily to the new button, but in fact any help button is always added at the end of the list. Now that behavior, if the button is pressed, does what we wanted it to do, which is to pop open a help reference to the information on the Help Center discussing the opportunities. We can take this a little bit further. So we can look at other types of buttons that can be opened here as well. So you can see that you can call out to other standard behavior inside CRM. You can call, and you'll notice there where we've got these in the first example at the top, I'm using the idea of calling out to a system page using the idea of the system action. If you were to go on to any of our pages and look at the URLs, you will see different system actions being present. Right at the beginning, in the early lessons, we talked about the contents of the URLs at the top of every screen and looked at the idea that certain pages had system actions, like the company summary page is 200, and you might see an opportunity list is 160 as a system action. So these system action numbers can be used inside a button crm.url and be able to call directly that. As you experiment with this, you can become quite clever. For example, calling up internal features such as the internal email client within context, anything like that can be used. But you need to then think about how the context is passed to it to ensure that when actions take place, it knows where to go off to. There are articles which talk about all of the different variables that can be included within the URL and how you can manually change the URL as well. Another thing to point out to you within this slide is where we have got the idea of calling a button, but this time linking it into the system security and the rights of the particular user. You'll notice we've got a line here which says it shows the declaration of a variable called string new company security button. And this gives the example as the fourth and fifth parameter where it says company and insert. This means that you would only be able to see this button if the user had insert rights on the company entity. So the button would only appear if the user had the correct rights, and that's used to really control the HTML that is generated so that the button would not appear at all. Let's see what we go to from our page. We want to be able to take this a little bit further, and if we look at the idea of our page where we have the original list page, clicking on the new page, we want to be able to add a record now. Now I'm using the opportunity record. It just provides us with a very simple way of testing any of this behavior. The basic structure of the ad page has to handle what happens as you start to come into the page, which is as you are presenting and opening the user interface screen. Is it going to be is it going to want to allow the user to enter straight away? So is it going to be in edit mode or is it going to be in view mode? And then we also have to think about the idea of what happens to the data. Is it going to be saved or unsaved? And this is the idea of testing for mode as well. But let's see how this screen flow works. So it might be that we start off with our list page, we click the new button, and we come straight into a page which allows us to enter new details. So we're able to type straight away, and we can also see once we've put the information in, we can come and save the data, but we have to understand where we want to be able to end up once the data has been inserted into the database and committed. In my case, I've decided that I want to return, once I hit the save button, to the list. And so this becomes an important idea that we want to be able to hit the save, handle and know whether the record has been saved, and so we can arrive at the correct page. In my case, we've done this by using a check on mode. So let's look at what we've got here. In the page, we have that opening check where it says, is the mode equal to view? And if it is equal to view, then change it over to edit. Now you'll notice that view, edit, and further down save are variables. They are declared in the Sage CRM nolang.js file. I'm explicitly going to look at those a little bit later on. But here you can see a check is made against a particular value to recognize which mode we're in order to control what's going on. So the initial check on mode allows us to flick the way in which the screen is presented to us after it's been retrieved from metadata into being an edit mode. But you'll notice that after the get page, we're going to see whether the mode has been placed into save. This is because mode changes as a record is committed. So if the record is committed, the mode will be switched over to be saved. We can check for that, and we can then cause a redirect to take place. You'll notice that we're able to use standard ASP methods. Here we've obviously used ASP methods to allow us to do response write, but here you can see I'm doing a response.redirect, allowing my HTTP response to be sent to a completely different page. So in this case, I've gone back to the original page, which would show me where my new record has been listed out. So I arrive back on a list page, and in here I may want to do other work with this. I may want to carry out a bit of editing, and this is the structure of pages that we looked at in the course of yesterday. But if we're going to develop the screen structures, then just as we've looked now in this lesson at buttons, we need to start thinking about, well, perhaps if we've inserted and listed and edited, what about if we want to be able to delete some records? So if I was to click on the screen, the record status in this list, I know I would go off to another custom file. This is because I've changed in metadata what happens to this column. And you'll see that on my Oppo status column, I've changed the behavior so that the hyperlink is a custom jump. Now, when it's a custom jump, and we'll see custom jump again, or rather we'll see custom.net, excuse me. We'll see custom jump and custom edit again when we're dealing with ASP pages, but right to the bottom, you'll see custom file and custom ID field. So those are the two fields that we need to know about. One is dealing with the indicating which page we should go to, and the second one is saying what is the key that we intend to pass across that is important for the page that we're going to. So Oppo_opportunity ID. And if we do click on that Oppo status column, this is where we would end up looking at a record here. You'll notice in the URL at the top, we will see that our URL has called our page oppo_edit.asp, and you'll notice is the first name value pair Oppo_opportunity ID with then the ID that for the record. The page is looking for that information and is reading the information from the query string. So in this particular example, I'm not using get context info, which would be obtaining the information with the assumption that we know we are dealing with a particular current context. Because a list allows you to jump over to another context, so we're changing context. This is where we are, because we were in the context of the company, we're now in the context of an opportunity. We're fixing, in a way, the context to be used in this hyperlink jump. And I can read using request.query string the value of the variable that we're interested in. So that's the parameter information being grabbed. The next thing to look at, as we see here, is what that looks like in terms of our behavior. So we can edit, we can change, we can make the change that we want, and then we can save. And when we save, we're returned back into that context. So if all the context is maintained. Now you'll know that that original set of 4 or 5 lines of code is all that has taken to build that complexity of the ability to edit and then save the data back in here. But what if we want to delete? What if we want to change and do other things with this particular record? Now, we started looking at the idea of mode, and I said I would come and look at where mode variables are defined, and they're inherited from this file, Sage CRM nolang.js file. And here you can see view, edit, save, pre-delete, post-delete, and clear. Clear is a special one used within the context of search pages, and it's to do with clearing down the remembered search that you've used last time. We are going to use the idea of the post to delete to work out whether we have just deleted a record, then send the user to somewhere else. So back inside our screen, our interface, we have a change button, and what I want to be able to do is add in a delete button. And I've got that delete button now inside my interface, and I click on the delete, and I'm then returned back to the listing out of the records. Now, how did I get a delete button into the interface? I've used a different technique here from the add button and button methods, the two methods, add button and button. Here, I've taken advantage of some inbuilt properties of a block. The line that I want to point out to you is where I have chosen to add in a button call. So I've got a display button with button delete. Now that button delete variable again is defined within inside Sage CRM nolang.js, and it is just a flag to indicate to the block that a particular type of button needs that is like a predefined element for that screen should be displayed. Normally it's switched off, but here, true, I force it in. This Boolean then will flag, displays the delete button. The button works as a delete button if I also check to see whether the delete has occurred. And you'll notice that I'm using this idea of a check on the mode on post delete, and if the delete has taken place, I'm then sending that out to oppo list. This is where we have the idea of the behavior of hitting the delete and knowing that it returns to this particular location. Now, the last thing that I wanted to mention today is taking that information from knowing that there are different modes, knowing that there are different ways in which we can control what happens when you arrive on a screen, so you can change it to a particular mode, and then you can tell to see whether an automatic switch has occurred in order for you to reroute the page to another location. So I want to introduce you to the idea of complex screens. Now, complex screens are where you have more than one block within the screen. They can be relatively simple, so you can have two blocks on the same record. So, for example, the web picker for an opportunity and the detail box, they're dealing with the same record. Or you can have complex screens which are dealing with two entities at the same time. So the idea you're collecting information from a company and a person, so the idea of a parent and a child. But probably the best way of starting to understand complexity in the screens is to look at the idea of a search page. Now, a search page consists of one parental block associated with a grid or another list block beneath it. You can see here that I'm using metadata to do the heavy lifting. I'm using the variable the method getBlock to retrieve opportunity search box from metadata. Because it is a search block, I can set a flag to turn on the idea of saved searches, so they're available. I'm getting the second block, which is the opportunity grid, and then I'm building something called a container. A container is used inside a complex screen to allow you to refer to all elements together. It controls the display, but it mostly is concerned with the idea of grouping elements in an association. Here you can see our container is going to have or will have a series of methods saying add block, adding the different structures into the page. Now, I've also included the idea of a clear button which sets the clear value for the page. But there we've got my block container containing the search block and the grid block, which will contain the results, and then the clear button. What we see in the two of these is that the relationship is established between the search block and the grid through the definition of an argument object. The argument object for grids can be used to pass to it a parameter set that will be used to limit the returned value displayed in the grid. In this case, the opportunity search block will be used to provide all of the name value pairs that are defined inside that screen. So if you were to use the opportunity status or whatever in that search box, it would then be passed into the parameter to limit the rows returned into the opportunity grid. We then send the container to the page, and then the page is built. Now that might look a little bit daunting, but I want to say is that what we can use is the help to allow us to start to move to create complex pages. Sage CRM 2023 R2 has introduced inside the Help Center the first artificial intelligence agent to be able to help us assemble the pages that we want. Here, for example, this is showing how you would go about and construct. I've literally asked our Sage CRM Ally AI agent to help me write the page to create and how I would go about creating a search page. I could, of course, look on the community, and I could go ahead into the community and be able to look at the different information here. Now, this could not, in the course of these 2 lessons, cover everything about ASP Pages. In the context of classroom training, this is 2 days on its own, being able to look at all sorts of different aspects, but we've only had 2 hours, or barely 2 hours. So what I'd like you to do is to take these concepts and check how they are expressed in the context of articles inside the Sage Community Hub. Have a look at the hints, tips and tricks blog, and you should be able to see there's a lot of different articles around how to do things inside the ASP pages. Now, we will meet coding techniques in JavaScript again and again on this course. We will also see parallels to the COM ASP API when we come on to dealing with both self-service and also the .NET API. But where we're going next is to look at the component manager. And the component manager, really, this is a good point to do it, because the component manager builds, or can build, ASP pages for us, and it can also be a great tool for moving metadata definitions from one system to another system. We'll look at the component manager next week, so I hope you're going to join me then. But for now, let's see what questions people have. Thank you and goodbye. Happy coding.